So, what if healing is not about becoming someone new, but remembering the wisdom your body has been trying to communicate all along? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to NeuroAlchemy, the brain body healing podcast. This is the space where science meets soul, where healing is explored as a multidimensional journey, and where we slow our conversations down just enough to make those complex ideas feel accessible and human. I'm your host, Dr. Sarah Young. I'm a neurointegrative and functional medicine practitioner, and much of my work centers on helping people reconnect the dots between the brain, the nervous system, emotional experience, and the deeper layers of identity that shape how we heal. One of the things we do intentionally on this podcast is define our terms clearly, not because we don't know what things are, but because clarity creates safety, and safety opens the door for more healing opportunities. And when the nervous system is safe, you guys, people are much more able to access that insight, that flexibility, and their healing. We're all capable of that. Today's conversation explores our innate capacity to heal and the powerful role that the body and the natural world can play in helping people reconnect with inner wisdom, self trust, and authenticity. And as always, listen gently, pause when you need to. Nothing here is about perfection or force. Everyone, take a breath. You don't need to fix anything today, just arrive. Today, I'm joined by Katie, founder of Somatic Nature Therapy. Katie describes herself as someone deeply in love with both humans and the natural world, and her work centers on helping people reconnect with their authentic self through somatic healing, nervous system regulation, and nature based resourcing. Rather than focusing only on short term symptom relief, he helps people develop practical tools for regulation while also supporting long term transformation and self trust. Katie, welcome. I'm really glad you're here.
Thank you so much. Such an honor to be here with you.
How do you pronounce your last name?
Asmus.
I was going to say that, but I didn't want to butcher your last name, so I just
Yes,
paused.
no worries.
Before we dive in, I always like to begin with just a gentle check in. How are you arriving today, whether that's physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual, as we begin this conversation?
Thanks for the question. I'm going to just take a breath and feel into that. I'm arriving feeling excitement to be here and excitement for the spring weather that is outside my window in the sunshine right now.
Love that. Spring is my favorite time of year when everything is starting to grow and it really feels like the whole world's kind of coming alive.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's so nice to feel the new life and the lighter, longer days, and it's good for my soul and spirit.
Absolutely. And for all of you out there, there's no right way to arrive here with us today. However, you're showing up is enough. Katie, before we move further into your work and your story, I'd love to just ground a few key ideas that may come up later today. One phrase you mentioned is somatic resourcing. For listeners who may be completely new to that terminology, how can you explain what that actually means?
Yes. So I use these terms resource and resourcing a lot in the work that I do that around supporting the nervous system. And for me, and then I'll weave in somatic here, but a resource is a something that helps us to shift our state when we connect with it to one of good, calm, grounded, joy, or simply feeling better than we felt before we connected with that. And so then somatic resourcing is really weaving in the body on somatic awareness, body awareness in some way, whether that is actually doing a movement or taking a breath or simply noticing that when we connect with something that has a positive association for us, what is the impact on our body mind?
Thank you for that. And from a nervous system perspective, resourcing helps create those anchors of safety, would you say?
Absolutely. Yes. And in the work that I do, no matter what context, because I am a therapist, I'm a teacher, I lead workshops and retreats, and whatever it is, I always start with helping people connect with something that is resourcing for them so that if anything comes up that is stressful throughout our time together, they know what they can go back to as an anchor, like you said, to regulate, to calm, to kind of take a break. So I absolutely love that this is how you start the podcast.
Absolutely. Those small experiences really do communicate to the body you're okay in this moment. And that is so important, especially for individuals who have, you know, living life can just make us a little bit of shell shocked in a way, but especially for our listeners, many of them have had, big T and little t traumas. And having those anchor points is so important because over time, those moments can reshape the way that our nervous system's responding to stress and overwhelm. And a lot of people don't realize we are rewirable.
Yes, forever until we die, we can shift our brains and bodies. So good.
Another term that we're going to touch on a little bit later today is nervous system regulation. From a neuroscience perspective, it refers to the nervous system's ability to move flexibly between activation and rest without becoming stuck. Katie, how do you help people recognize regulation in their everyday life?
Ooh. Well, as a somatic therapist, I really, from the very beginning of working with people, I assess, what is your connection with your senses and your own sensory awareness within your body. And if that's something that people haven't been asked or haven't noticed or have dissociated from out of survival, we start right there and we start looking at how do you feel and what do you feel and just start getting curious about that, and from there then we look at what does pleasure feel like or what does calm feel like versus what does stress feel like. And so from there I always say, you know theoretically most of us want to feel good, but with stress and trauma, the same part of the brain that registers pain registers pleasure. And so as we cut off from our feelings that are uncomfortable, we tend to cut off our feelings that are good as well. So I always start with helping people connect with resource, connect with something that feels positive to them or brings a good quality, and then start there with really noticing what is the impact on my felt sense when I think of that or when I'm in contact with that thing that is resourcing for me.
That's so beautiful. You also used a phrase that I really loved in your intake form, inner wisdom, that idea that the body, it carries guidance if we learn how to listen. How does inner wisdom, what does it mean to you in the context of healing?
There's so many layers here, but at the most organismic level, one of the things I often say when I'm facilitating is more of us or more of you is working than is not working, or you would not be here right now. And so, from the most cellular level, to have this awe of the way our hearts are beating us all day long, our lungs are breathing, whether we're paying attention to it or not. And there's so many ways that our bodies are really built to move toward health and healing, or and even in the survival experiences, they're built to protect us. And so as a somatic therapist, again, so much of the work is just beginning to listen to what is the impulse? What's already happening or trying to happen, whether that's on a physiological level, a movement level, an emotional level, even a thought level, because I really believe when we can get to the heart of an impulse, there's wisdom there. And then the way that we express that or live that out can be helpful, or sometimes it can be harmful to ourselves or others. But when we can get to the heart of it, there's so many ways to express the need, express the impulse that is wise and brings us into more presence, more flow, often more understanding of our own humanness and the wisdom of that.
I think many people spend years just overriding those internal signals. They're pushing through
Yes.
exhaustion, they're ignoring their discomfort, they're not even trusting their intuition. And part of healing often involves rebuilding that relationship with the body. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's so many messages we get in the world around, don't feel that way. Big girls don't cry. I'll give you something to cry about. You're fine. Whatever the different messages we might get from our family or our culture. And because we have these big brains, our neocortex, we actually have the capacity to override, to sort of tighten our muscles and hold our breath and stop that expression from moving through. But that is really, in my perspective, the cause of dis-ease in our systems is that stopping of those expressions and those movements. And of course, because we've gotten those messages from the world.
I'd love to move into your story. Many people who move into healing work arrive there through their own lived experiences. And I would love to know what drew you towards somatic healing and reconnecting people with that inner wisdom.
Thank you for that question. Well, I would say that from a young age, I knew that I wanted to do work in the world that was something that I would do anyway, like follow my passions and contribute. And have always been very curious about health and wellness and self growth and development. And I was always very active. I did a lot of dance. And then I got into outdoor education. And actually, a big part of sort of what led me on my path is growing up, I was a perfectionist in a lot of ways, and I didn't like to get dirty. But when I found outdoor work, there was something about the combination of relationship, of being with other humans, being in the natural world where it was beautiful. There was a lot of peacefulness where I was working kind of at the lake and also learning and growing. These pieces came together that created less inhibition for me in some way and started helping me realize through, you know, the natural world is imperfect, but it's perfectly imperfect. We don't judge it, right? And there was something about that, the metaphors that came through in relationship with nature and relationship also with humans in nature that really had an impact on me. I felt kind of a relaxing and opening up, a trust in the messiness of life. And in this work, I was working outdoor education where we were doing challenges also rock climbing, mountain climbing, backpacking, all different things. And one of the things that people would often say when they did something that was physically challenging is they would say, if I could do this, I could do anything. And so I just kept sort of following the threads and taking it a step further and had this question of how do I help people deepen those experiences? How do I also deepen them for myself? And that led me to studying somatic psychology with an emphasis in dance therapy and weaving connection with nature all through my graduate studies. And then that has really become my work in the world.
And you know what I appreciate about stories like this is they're often reflecting something that's so deeply human that the body often knows something long before the mind
Yes.
has the language for it.
Yes, it is so true. So true. Our bodies don't lie.
You mentioned that somatic resourcing is central to your work. For someone feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or dysregulated, what does that look like in actual practice?
Yeah. So there are so many different things out there that now we have different breath practices, movement practice, focus practice, sensory awareness practices that can help us resource, help us come into the present moment, shift our states. And one of the things when I teach other practitioners, I teach lots of different tools. But ultimately, what I think is really helpful for people is to find maybe two or three practices that work the best for you because some people are going to have better results with some, taking 5 deep breaths or box breathing or different particular practices where other people feel like they can become more embodied when they move, when they dance, when they go on a walk. And I think the more that we repeat something that works for us, our body mind remembers that. And the quicker we can shift states, the quicker we can resource. So, those are some of the key ways doing different breathing practices, movement practices, focusing practices. But I really love to say to each person, find the ones that work best for you and do those over and over again.
It's so important to be curious, isn't it?
Yes, yes. So helpful.
What are some of the first things that people tend to notice as they begin reconnecting with what it means to have safety in the body?
What are the first things that they begin to notice? That's what you said. Yes. Well, I think that one of the things that I help people direct them to notice is when I'm teaching folks is the felt sense of ground beneath us. And so often when we've had chronic stress, the core of us is where we feel stress. Often anxiety is felt in the chest or the kind of solar plexus. And so when we put our attention on the felt sense of the ground beneath us, it's typically further away from the areas in our body where we feel the stress. And also putting our attention on that felt sense signals safety to our bodies, that there's a ground beneath us that we can rest down into, that we're not floating in space. So that's something that I purposely have people notice. I would also say that, again, everyone sort of has different experiences of good feelings. Sometimes it's a calm through their whole body. Sometimes I direct people to just find one place in their body that feels good, relaxed, or neutral. And I often say, and if nothing else, often our earlobes are neutral, which brings a little laugh often. And yeah, actually, I think that my earlobes are neutral. Also, something that is accessible for many people when they're first beginning to notice and resource is pressure and giving themselves pressure somewhere on their bodies. I often say, maybe your eyes, it feels good to make contact, or your legs, or give yourself a little hug. And the edge of our nervous system is our skin. And so as we make that contact, there's a lot of different ways that implicitly or unconsciously communicates sense of presence and existence and even support to our body minds.
I think so many people mistakenly believe that healing has to happen through some kind of massive breakthrough, through some dramatic opening event, right? Because
Yeah.
maybe it's Hollywood that's made us think like that. But what you're saying and what I've seen and practiced myself is that nervous system healing is much quieter than that.
Yes. And what I have found over time is that when we heal our nervous system, we are growing our felt sense of safety. And when we feel safe in our bodies, what happens is there's a natural exhale, there's a natural relaxation. And what often happens from that place is the energy that we've been holding on to starts to release. And often that looks like tears or even a little bit of shaking without even any content or any stories associated with it. And people can have a little fear of that. And, I usually just normalize that and say, this is your body releasing what you've been holding on to all this time. So while many of my clients at first will say, can we get to the big stuff? Can we get to the hard stuff? When we work with the healing, I find, in fact, happens faster because it's happening through trusting the body and trusting the sensations that move through. And so things actually get to resolve as opposed to sort of inner conflict with ourselves around the fear of going into the big stuff.
Something you said in your intake form was that really stood out to me was that idea that long-term healing could be understood as a rite of passage. And that framing feels so meaningful because it's suggesting transformation rather than fixing something that's broken. So, what do you mean when you describe healing as a rite of passage?
Thank you for this question. This is such a passion of mine. So, the framework of rite of passage, the actual sort of terminology came from a European anthropologist Arnold van Gennep in the early 1900s. He was looking at cultures throughout time that honored different life transitions and honored them with ceremonies. And what he identified is that life is transition, and that because, they're so impactful to our identities, that they have been honored. And so that has then been woven into our modern day, looking at the stages that we go through in big life transition. And the first one, in fact, is letting go or severing from the old way. The middle one being no name, the liminal, I'm not who I was before, I'm not who I'm becoming. And the final stage of change or rite of passage is the incorporation, or the bringing the new way into the body. And so when we look at, especially in the work that I do, I work with a lot of people who have experienced big T trauma. And one thing that they often identify when I use this framework is that traumatic incident started my rite of passage. It started me questioning, who am I now? What is my identity now? And so when we consciously ask these questions, honor what is no longer a part of our life, even grieve that, and then start to ask, who am I now? What is important now? The rite of passage model really gives us a roadmap to moving through healing. And there's even a body of work now that has been highly studied, researched, written about, which is called post traumatic growth. And the idea that when we get to the other side of trauma, sometimes people will say things like, I never would have wished that would happen to me, but I wouldn't be who I am today. And there are all these things that I gained and learned about myself in my life and my community. I'm live more authentically. And so I think this roadmap of a rite of passage really helps normalize those experiences of struggle, of grief, of even groundlessness that happens, that often within the healing process.
And as someone who's had big T's and little T's herself, I would have to absolutely agree with you that even though looking back on some of those, some of those horrific experiences in my life, they did shape me to be the person that I am, that can offer so much loving and so much care and empathy and light to the world. I don't know who I would have become without, those periods of struggle in my life. Tell us a little bit more about how that shifts the way people relate to their struggles.
Well, even the fact that there is a framework at all helps people feel like they're not alone. They say there are words to what I'm going through. And so that is huge. And then again, I think it helps people have a little bit more self compassion, and helps look at what can actually help me get through, help me take one step at a time. What are the actions? We also look at, who is your community, because we are interwoven with a huge web of life. And sometimes when people go through traumatic experiences, they actually feel alone. And so part of this process too is looking at, well, are you woven with the earth? Do you feel woven with the earth? Do you feel woven with your dogs? What are the beings? Because whether you feel this or know this from your mind or not, you are. So let's look at the places that feel safe, the beings that support you, and start to really weave back into that wider web.
That changes the perspective of healing from what is wrong with me, right? Into what is this experience asking me to become
Yes.
aware of? And that's a very different relationship with healing.
Yes, there's a question that I learned through the post traumatic growth work, that the question we can hold is, what is possible now that wasn't possible before? So the metaphor that they often use there is, imagine a vase breaking, our favorite vase breaking, and a first impulse is, how do I glue it back together? And you can't quite ever bring it back to what it was. But what is possible is we can make a mosaic out of the pieces and create another beautiful piece. And so the idea of we can't go back, and how can I mine what I now know? How can I mine the learnings and what I have learned about my own capacities to go forward with even more knowledge, even more compassion for ourselves, and often also for others?
You also spoke about the importance of having both short term tools as well as a long term vision. Why do people need both?
Yes, thank you. Well, I feel like there's something about a long term vision, whether that is about our own health and wellness, or maybe something that we envision doing in the world or experiencing in the world, that is what pulls us forward. That is what keeps us going one step at a time when we're in a longer rite of passage or healing journey. So, some sort of, yeah, something to move toward. And then as we are taking those steps, often, especially in the beginning or in the middle of a healing journey, it can feel overwhelming. Like, will I ever be in another place? And so, this is where those resourcing tools are so important to help ourselves realize that we can actually impact our present moment state. There's something I can do, even in the midst of bigger suffering. There are ways that I can get through the moment, get through the day, maybe even bring some positive qualities. But I think it really is important to recognize and hold both so that we have something to move forward for on those hard days.
Tell us a little bit more about what happens when someone only focuses on symptom management without that larger sense of growth or direction.
Yeah, I think that what we focus on grows. We've learned that in a lot of different ways with neuroscience, both what we focus on in our bodies, what we focus on outside of us. But in my experience, what happens when we focus on the symptom management is that we get very focused on what's not working. And we also can have fear and anxiety of what is happening today, what is happening in this moment. And that can become, we can become kind of taken in by that anxiety around that as the focus. So, while again, yes, developing practices to state shift, developing practices to work with symptoms, we need to be able to shift out of that into literally a different body mind state. Because when we shift into a different body mind state, a whole different neurophysiological kind of experience is also available to us. And it's the both and I think that helps us move from where we are in the present to another possibility in life.
That balance feels especially important in nervous system healing because people need practical tools that help them regulate in the moment, but they also need hope. And hope itself can
Yes.
become regulating for the nervous system all on its own.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
The heart of your work is helping people reconnect with their authentic self. What does authenticity mean from a somatic perspective?
Ooh, I love this question. From a somatic, and this is to me, that is the essence of everything because the somatic perspective is listening to the wisdom, the impulses, the movement, the sensations of our body, which is the building blocks of how we know who we are, how we know what we like, what we don't like, what we're a yes to, what we're a no to. And so authenticity from that place of somatic awareness is really learning to listen to what is happening in our bodies, to honor it, to start to let go of the judgments that we've picked up from society around, I should feel this way, I shouldn't feel this way, this is how my body should be, all the messages. And when we can start to let go of that and get to the heart of the center of what is happening, There's so much health and information there and possibility to really live our lives in the way that is most authentic for us, not what other people are telling us we should be or should do or should feel.
I like to tell my clients, "Don't shut on yourself because it's the same thing as shitting on yourself."
Yes, yes, exactly.
People begin rebuilding that self-trust after spending years overriding all of their internal signals.
I mean, often I think it can be really, really helpful to have an ally in that, and whether that's a therapist or a coach or a friend or someone that does trust the body or trust you, right? Because I think when other people haven't trusted us, when people have told us not to trust ourselves, it is hard to start to shift that perspective. And one of the things that my clients always tell me is that I feel so trusting of them and I feel so trusting of their bodies helps them to begin to trust themselves and let go of some of that fear and anxiety that comes up around maybe the sensations they're feeling. So I think often it is helpful to have somebody or somebody that's walked the path before us, who's actually gone through those steps that can sit with us and say, no, this is okay. This is normal. This is a normal experience in as you're gaining self-trust. So that's the first thing that comes up. And I think finding the places that are supportive, finding the people that are supportive, finding your way, what are the practices or the exercises or the different things that actually help help you feel better. Those are the and then practicing those, giving yourself the permission and making space to do those things that actually feel aligned and good.
And I think many people can relate to that feeling of disconnection of, between knowing something internally, but they're doubting themselves anyway. And, self-trust it's rebuilt slowly. It is rebuilt through consistency. It is rebuilt through safety and giving yourself permission to embody the whole experience rather than putting it into parts and putting judgments on it.
Yes.
Nature also seems deeply woven into your work. I know you talked a little bit about that earlier. Tell us more about the natural world's role in nervous system healing.
Yes. Well, I could talk about this for hours. The most obvious one that is so accessible for everyone is that it calls on our senses. It awakens the five senses in the immediate. So if we walk out our door, even I'm sitting in front of a window, I can look out the window and I see the mountain in front of me and I see the clouds. And even that brings a smile to my face. So nature brings us into the present moment. It's novel, it's ever changing. And typically, especially if we hold the question, what is pleasing? That's often what I ask people. Find something that pleases you. There absolutely is something, whether it's the visual of the shaking of the leaves or the sounds of the birds. So it's something that just is easily accessible that helps when we put our attention on the thing that is pleasing us. Our nervous systems start to regulate all by themselves, which is amazing. So that's one way. And then the natural world is alive. It's dynamic. And we can be in relationship with these different living beings. I mentioned earlier one of the ways that I work with my clients and metaphors with nature is looking at the imperfection of nature. And one day I said to a client who was having a lot of body image issues and self-judgment about her sensitivity in her body, we were sitting outside and I said, "So you see this flower bush and you see this oak tree, which one is better?" And she started laughing and she was like, "What do you mean? What's better?" I'm like, "Which one do you think is better?" She's like, "That doesn't even make sense." And I said, "Exactly. Exactly. We are all different. We all have different ways and difference. Neither is right or wrong. It's just different." So the metaphors that we find in nature And then one of the things that I love to have people do is with any question they're holding or any experience they're feeling stuck with, I say, hold a question. Find a question like, what do I need to know about my anxiety? Or how do I access my inner wisdom? So we just work with what are the kind of therapeutic questions we're holding. And then I have people go and find something in nature, sit with it, observe it, maybe even have a conversation out loud with it, and see what does this being have to tell you about your question. And inevitably, people have ahas. Some people have had life changing experiences when I've done this with them, even for a few minutes that they've like moved across the country because they got some clarity around something. And so I feel like with the sensory experiences, with the metaphors, and with the dynamicness of relationship, there's so many different ways that being in nature is therapeutic, along with just the fresh air. And there's actually a physiological response that happens in our body when we smell the dirt, when we breathe the fresh air that is ultimately actually regulating.
What shifts in people when they reconnect with the rhythms of nature instead of constantly living in stimulation and urgency?
Yeah, a big exhales. I have people often come out to the woods for a couple days to 5 days, and inevitably, people say that they think clearer, that they feel calmer, and especially after a couple days, I think the pace of our lives are so fast, the amount of technology that we interact with on a daily basis is the highest it's ever been, which really impacts our focus, our nervous system. So the things that people describe are really more relaxed, more focused, more present, more ease, more awe. They start to notice things that they haven't noticed. So much happens.
The nervous system evolved in relationship with the natural world. And so many people today, just like you said, they're attempting to heal, but they're living in that chronic overstimulation, that
Yeah.
speed, that noise, that, disconnection. And reconnecting with nature can absolutely be deeply regulating biologically, emotionally, as well as spiritually.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
So in each of our episodes, we like to offer our listeners something called a micro practice invitation, not a major protocol, but not anything that's overwhelming, just a gentle practice that our listeners can explore every day over the next week that you think would give them high impactfulness. So I'd love to know from you, Katie, what practice would you offer someone who wants to begin reconnecting with their inner wisdom and nervous system safety?
Great. I think this one of the last exercises I just shared, my practice would be to invite you to consider a question, an open ended question that you have in your life. And that could be, how do I work with my nervous system? It could be, how do I be more calm? What do I need to know about my current flow in life? Something that is meaningful, and to either go outside or go to the window if outside is not accessible. Allow your attention to wander and choose one thing that in nature and hang out with it for 5 minutes and just see, what do you notice? What does it know about your question? And you could do that every day. You could do it with the same nature being, could be drawn to the same tree each day, or you could be drawn to something different each day and just see what occurs to you. And there's something in that relationship between ourselves and nature that, while nature is the metaphor, it's also evoking something that is a deep knowing inside of us.
I love that. We're back to being curious and staying connected, aren't we?
Yes. Yes. And like you always say, I would say no pressure. There's no pressure. Just be curious and whatever happens is just right.
Absolutely. So, for any listeners that are out there that maybe they feel disconnected from themselves, maybe they feel overwhelmed or uncertain, what do you most hope that they remember about themselves after hearing our conversation today?
I would say that you have everything within you that you need and trust yourself to also connect with the people, places, environments that help you feel more aligned or connected with your own wisdom and self so that that trust and knowing and connection within can flourish.
Katie, thank you so much for sharing your work and your perspective with us today. Conversations like this remind us that healing is often not something we acquire outside of ourselves, but it's something that we can slowly discover within. To everyone listening, thank you for spending time with us today. If this conversation resonated with you, please share it. Please hit like. Please subscribe to our show. That is how these conversations travel and reach the people who need to hear them the most. I'm Dr. Sarah Young, and this is NeuroAlchemy. And until next time, remember this: you're not broken, you are becoming. Bye for now.
Thank you.